Shalom from Jerusalem, and this is Jerusalem Studio. I'm Amir Oren, sitting in for the traveling Jonathan Hessen, and we are already in the month of January 2025, but we will try to look back at 2024 in order to have some stock taking, to recap what has happened in order to learn for the future, and tomorrow we will have another such program looking ahead to 2025. With us are Dr. Uzi Arad, formerly the head of the Israeli National Security Staff, and earlier the political advisor to the Prime Minister and the Intelligence Division Chief at Mossad. Dr. Arad, welcome.
Hello.
And the other two doctors here. It's like a doctor's office, a clinic.
Generalists.
Yes, journalists.
And the second is always the best advice.
Okay. Dr. Eran Lerman, colonel in the Israeli Defense Forces Reserve, formerly with the National Security Staff and earlier the Directorate of Military Intelligence. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Brigadier General in the Reserves, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly with military intelligence and the head of the intelligence division at Mossad. Dr. Sofrin, as we look back at 2024, when we started the year, it was 4 weeks after what we thought would be the first, but up to now the only hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. The Israeli Defense Forces troops were maneuvering inside Gaza. The fight between Hezbollah and Israel was limited to exchanges from across the border, Hezbollah missiles, rockets, and drones, and Israeli Air Force attacks. And there was not yet a direct involvement by Iran. Obviously, Iran has masterminded what its proxies have been doing, but it was not yet involved in the direct fight. There was also the beginning of the Houthi offensive against Israel. Now, looking back at the year entirely, were there opportunities missed for a breakthrough, for ending the war in an advantageous position for Israel?
I think that if you look back on 2024, the major issue is that we have a strategic turnover all over the Middle East. That means that Israel really changed the equation between us and between Iran and all its proxies. And the fact that Israelis and Iran, is for the first time in history, were engaged twice in exchanging projectiles or attacks by our Air Force and their projectiles into Israel is an historic event. That means that they crossed the Rubicon, and they are now less afraid than Israel than they used to be before, and they were willing to exchange or to challenge Israel for the first time in history.
Why less afraid? They were futile in what they have done, and conversely, Israel was very effective especially in the October attack, not the April attack.
Right. I mean, first of all, I refer to the April attack. Second, on October, we hit very bad, and actually we demolished all their anti-aircraft capabilities, and now they're very vulnerable, and they reconsider twice before making any move against Israel. That's first. Second, did we miss some opportunities? I believe that we missed opportunity to make some break on the war in Gaza. After Hamas really was demolished, its military capabilities, it's fighting now guerrilla fighting, but it will never cease. Even if it stays there for 20 years, they will still go on fighting guerrilla fighting against our troops. And that means that I believe that we missed this opportunity to, first of all, to stop the war, to go into another exchange or releasing the people imprisoned in Gaza, and to bring them back home. And this is ongoing, and people are dying there. There are less and less people alive in Gaza. And in the end, if it doesn't work out right now on this coming deal that we hope that will be implemented,
Dr. Lerman, it seems as if the party which missed the greatest opportunity of all was Hezbollah, because they started attacking Israel on October the 8th, 2023, and throughout 2024, they kept basically the same level of attacks. Had they stopped unilaterally on September the 1st, before the beepers, before the walkie-talkies, before the decapitation of Hassan Nasrallah and his entire chain of
Not to
command,
mention the ground incursion.
and before the ground incursion, they would have been in a different position.
Probably, because I don't think that Israel would have initiated such operations in a situation of ceasefire. But for Hassan Nasrallah, this was never really an option. First of all, because he was overly confident in terms of his ability to survive and confront Israel. In fact, he probably looked at his ability for a full year to provoke and keep middle intensity attacks on Israel without being seriously harmed as an indication of Israeli weakness. His famous fantasy that Israel is essentially as weak as cobwebs. What actually fell upon him in a sequence of actions, by the way, interestingly, that began with an Israeli retaliation for the death of the Druze children in Majd al-Shams and the killing of Fuad Shukr. That was the trigger to all that happened afterwards. It was simply
which is really a failure of the Israeli air and missile defense system to intercept this particular rocket.
This particular rocket was not intercepted effectively and probably wasn't directed
at any specific target.
Any specific target. But one thing led to another. But until, I think, his last day, he underestimated Israel's capabilities. He probably looked at our dysfunction vis-a-vis Gaza and did not fully realize just how deeply penetrated his own organization has become in intelligence terms, because without very specific and extensive intelligence preparation for 15 years or 17 years, since the war of 2006, we would not have been in the situation we were at the last quarter of 2024. The second reason is that he was never really a free agent. He was acting for the Iranians as part of a broader Iranian strategy of using their proxies for the same reason he was going on, for the same reason that the Houthis are going on. They're paying a price, a very heavy price. Infrastructure in Yemen has been destroyed. They have suffered much more significantly than we did from their bothersome attacks on Israeli targets. But they could pursue this because this is their duty as part of the Iranian system.
Dr. Arad, as you know, newspapers, magazines, television channels usually start preparing their annual summaries in late November in order to be ready in December. And had we done this recap in late November of 2024, we would have had to throw it all away once the major event of last year took place, and that is the upheaval in Syria, which started in late November, but culminated on December the 8th, the fall of Assad and the rise of Ahmed Ashara, also known as al-Julani. How do you frame this event in the larger picture of the Middle East?
Well, you see, what we are doing now is looking at last year with what we call the hindsight wisdom. And we can see the turn of events. And we noted, as my colleagues here have noted, all those developments, all those fluidities. And you cannot avoid noticing how many of the events that took place came as a surprise, either to the parties perpetrating them or to the other side. And the amount of sheer occurrences that caught us completely unaware is immense. And the event in Syria is such a thing. Although the possibility of a breakdown of Syria was contemplated a decade ago, people tended to assume that things have stabilized, or it did, with the structure that it had, Russian presence, Iranian involvement, and an Assad in place. Suddenly, the whole thing collapses. And it is not just that Syria is again reopened to these new forces, but also the powers that came to be involved. Russia is retreating, possibly. Iran may be conceding defeat, maybe not. So it's a big change happening, which came as a surprise to practically everybody involved. Israel too. And we have to sort out what our policy should be here. But let me just draw your attention to it is not just surprises, but it is cases of, without exception, any party at some point in time either underestimated something or overestimated something. For example, you noted that Nasrallah overestimated his capacity, not being aware that, in fact, he is sitting on a time bomb, which we have set long ago, but was detonated at that particular time. Others overestimated their position, say Iran, immediately after our great failures at the beginning of the war, which have shown us to be at the weakest juncture when we suffered the kind of defeats that we've had with the invasion by Hamas of southern Israel and with the collapse of our both deterrent, if we had any, and our intelligence, presumably our glorious intelligence, being caught completely by surprise. That initially tended to feed a sense of a gain in the position of Iran and the axis that it led. What was underestimated was Israeli resilience and the Israeli ability to rise and gather and collect its strength, and even turning the tables here and there, either by effecting some judicious surgical strikes, but which were of strategic value vis-a-vis the Hezbollah, or even with Iran. The fact that Iran chose to attack Israel frontally and directly, possibly Iran overestimated its ability to gain something when in fact it did not. And the defense that would put forth impressed and turned to Iran's disadvantage, but that disadvantage became even much more acute with the Israeli counterstrikes against Iran, as was noted here. So there is no point in freezing the point at this moment, at the end of the year. That's a technical thing. Things here are rapidly evolving. They are rapidly evolving, some ways by strategic failures or strategic successes of the parties being surpassed so many times, that is, not being able to assess the true balance of power, and then also by constant underestimation and overestimation, which would lead us to be extremely modest in what we're trying to project as for the future. The future will probably be like the past, full of surprises and unexpected turns of events.
General Sofrin, regarding the centrality or lack thereof of personalities in regimes, we have seen that when Assad falls, obviously it's a major turnover. But if you look at Hamas and Hezbollah, and if the Iranians build a terror hall of fame, or from our point of view, a hall of shame, you can see many new inductees for the class of 2024, starting with Salah Haruri and Ismail Haniya and Fuad Shukr, who was mentioned here, and of course culminating with Hassan.
We say about all these people, Allah la yarahmu.
Yes. So
God roast their soul.
Hassan Nasrallah and Yahya Sinwar and Mohammad Def and several others. But their organizations have not changed their policies following the death of their leaders. Perhaps Hezbollah has been hit so badly in other respects, but it does not seem that the lack of Nasrallah has brought about a change. We are still in the middle of a ceasefire, which started in late November, and we have not seen the end of it. But Hamas, following the death of Yahya Sinwar, his brother Mohammed Sinwar took over, along with Khalil al-Haya and others. And does that mean that it does not matter who leads such organizations?
I don't agree with the definition, and I'll tell you why. If you look at Hamas really is hardly beaten or badly beaten. Now, Hamas has become a guerrilla organization that is fighting anywhere in Gaza where they can, and when they can recruit people and train them and give them ammunition and weapon systems, and they will carry on these attacks. And this is not a change in their policy. On the other hand, if you look at Hezbollah, when Nasrallah was alive, he said all the time and kept saying it consistently, the ceasefire will be only when the fighting in Gaza will cease. Now, when Naim Qassem, which is weaker than Nasrallah, and of course is now the organization is very badly damaged, he said, I'm not dependent on what happens in Gaza. That means I have to preserve my organization, my capabilities for the time being, and to be able to reinforce our capabilities, and therefore I will go for an independent ceasefire without saying that it will be dependent on what happened in Gaza, and this is a change of policy. And that means that this is another person with another concept, and more realistic, and more pragmatic, and understands the reality, and say, okay, I'm willing to give up some of my ideology, and to go back to this position. And that means that a change of person in several cases can change the policy and can change the attitude of the organization.
But what has changed, in addition to Nasrallah being killed, was what the Russians used to call the ratio of forces. Israel, of course, has strengthened its positions. Not only Hezbollah has been weakened, but Iran too, its sponsor. So perhaps, we don't know, perhaps Nasrallah too would have adopted had he been alive. But in order to cut a deal, not an interim one, not a ceasefire, maybe you do need a charismatic leader such as Yahya Sinwar or Nasrallah in order to impose his authority on more extreme elements within the organization.
On one hand, yes. On the other hand, people with ideology, they were people, of course. They are not with us anymore, lucky us. They had their ideology, and they won't be compromising on that. And therefore, the fact that this is a dominant leader that leads everybody on his way without being able to compromise and to adapt it to their new reality doesn't really mean that it's going to happen.
Dr. Lerman, the US-Israeli alliance, and even more specifically, the IDF-CENTCOM military alliance, we have seen unprecedented. American help to Israel, not only next to the launching pads of the Houthis, because the Americans have a naval presence there, which Israel does not, almost 2,000 kilometers from here, but also within Israel, they have batteries, they have other systems.
And finally shot the THAAD in anger successfully, which they celebrated.
THAAD is the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System.
The equivalent of the Israeli Hetz.
Equivalent, but one level higher. At least they managed to
The arrow is higher.
The Arrow 3, I think, is.
But they managed to intercept some Houthi
Definitely.
missiles.
Exo-atmospheric.
Definitely.
Yes.
Exo-atmospheric, yes, outside the atmosphere.
And in addition to that, of course, the Aegis vessels which came from the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean.
I think if there is one thing that may well be remembered long after this war is over, is not only the actual achievements by the IDF, but also the fact that not only the Americans here and there, but also Arab countries actually shot in targets in anger in support of the defense of Israel.
Right.
Saudis did, although they never admitted to it. The Jordanians did, although they're shy about it, but the Americans made it known that they participated in thwarting much of what Iran threw at us twice.
Drones mostly.
Drones mostly, yes. But
And cruise missiles.
and all of this, totally unprecedented. That has never happened before.
Right.
And down the road, when maybe we shall see the emergence of a regional community of like-minded nations in the face of the dual challenges of Iranian Islamism and Sunni jihadist Islamism, and where we have deep interests in common with Egypt, with Jordan, and with most of the Gulf states, Qatar excluded, I think this will be remembered as one of the turning points.
However, as far as has been published up to now, maybe there are undercurrents which we are not aware of or cannot speak about. There is not really an American-Israeli-Arab alliance. There are two alliances, the American-Israeli one and the American-Arab one. The result is what you just said, but there is no war room in which American officers sit side by side with Israelis and Arabs, even in exercises.
No, not yet, but the talk which precedes the war about they called it a Mid to Middle East Air Defense Treaty Organization. There's no treaty and there's no organization, true enough. But there is a level of cooperation and coordination conducted by CENTCOM.
In Tampa, Florida, at McNeil Air Force Base, but not here.
And from the war room in Qatar, which is ironic.
Al-Udeid.
In Al-Udeid. So the role of CENTCOM, of course, is unsung, but it is of major importance. We shall see, whether General Kurilla goes on to higher places or leaves, but he has left his mark.
Dr. Arad, we haven't talked about the Palestinian Authority and not only what takes place in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, but whether the Palestinian Authority can, not only is it wanted to, but can it throw its auspices over Gaza, at least partly, as part of some arrangement once the war is over?
Well, it does have certain clout. It does have certain legitimacy to assume that international legitimacy, but it apparently cannot do it alone. And the only construct that would be possible to have a Palestinian Authority presence, civilian and political, in Gaza is if it were to be assisted by other Arab participants. That could be put in place. But it goes for a great deal of political negotiations with them. And each one, and they're not making it easy on one another. But let's hope that this is in the cards. This is now what's been attempted. From the Israeli point of view, I think that overall we do have an interest, not only in the sense of satisfying expectations of us, is to generate a Palestinian-Israeli negotiating process that would aim at resolving gradually or in stages the present issues at stake, because it is the presence of those issues at stake which gives rise to extremism or to the incidents of violence which could recur. Mention was made of Hamas in Gaza, but let's remember Hamas on the West Bank, or any form of this kind of jihadist Islamic extremist movements that would generate terrorist activities on the West Bank, is a permanent danger. And one way of resolving that is by having a Palestinian Authority in place which would suppress And who is that to do? In the absence of such a Palestinian effectiveness, power, they are willing to do that, we would have it to do it ourselves. So we're back to square one.
Dr. Laban?
The sad side of our achievements in 2024 is that on the Palestinian situation, there is no prospect right now of the Palestinian Authority being capable of handling the catastrophic situation in Gaza. It barely handles areas within the West Bank under its authority, and most of the work continues to be done by the IDF. I think the two-state solution has moved to a secondary position at this stage. For this, it's as one friend of mine wrote recently, it's closed for renovations.
General Sofrin, just to round up this conversation,
That's where the risk is.
as time is running out, while generally one can say that Israel's position in late 2024 was much better than it was a year earlier, right after the massacre, except, of course, for the hostages still being in Gaza and the number of Israeli military casualties running up to almost 900, is that the Iraqi position in which the United States found itself in is worse than it was a year earlier, with calls for American presence to be out of Iraq. So just in a few words, because we must finish this discussion.
I'm not sure that we are in a better situation than we were before. That means that, of course, we demolished Hamas, we badly hurt Hezbollah, but nevertheless, we are still facing many challenges. Who is going to rule Gaza for the next future? What will be with the Houthis? Are they going to stop fighting, or are they going to go on fighting? What will be with Iran, together, of course, with the new American administration? What will be the future of Syria? There are more uncertainties than we used to have before 2024.
General Sofrin, Eran Lerman, Uzi Arad, thank you for taking part, and we will be back with another edition of Jerusalem Studio very soon. For the time being, Shalom from Jerusalem.